Welcome to NoctiPawz, your destination for the darkest tales that roam the open road. Tonight, we dive deep into the shadowy highways where truckers have faced the unexplainable. From ghostly encounters at lonely rest stops to chilling moments caught under the endless night sky, these are the stories that keep even the bravest drivers on edge. So buckle up, keep your eyes on the road, and prepare yourself for real-life horror straight from the cab. This is NoctiPawz, where every mile tells a tale, and every tale sends a shiver down your spine. Are you ready to hear what lurks in the dead of night? Then let's begin. And user says, truck drivers and drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Story 1. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So I'm driving through the pitch black and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I missed the last rest stop for the next while. No problem. The highway is completely deserted. So I pull to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car in drive, ready to peel out. But for some reason, I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window and I ask what's up. He replies to me in a very, very serious tone, I need you to call the cops. I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to kill himself, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughters right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was going to use on himself, so I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him, I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. Mama told me not to talk with strangers. Let's keep the stories. Story 2. Well, it was creepy at first. I pull into a Purdue plant, drop my empty trailer at Go Park where they allow bobtails to sit, right next to a nice little pond. My pickup was in 12 hours, so I do my PTI and lay down in the bunk. At about 3 a.m., I hear something tapping on my passenger side door. I get up, look out the window expecting to see someone, maybe a driver asking for a lumper check, but no one's there. Maybe I'm hearing things. So I go back to lay down. As soon as my head hits the pillow, I hear the tapping again, except this time it's on my driver's side. Same thing as before. I jump up and look out my window, but nothing's there. Double lock my doors just in case and open my side hatches so I can hear what's going on outside. After about 15 minutes, I hear a very light splat 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 going along the driver's side of the truck. I slowly get up, planning to look out my window at the exact moment whoever it is knocks on my door. And then I hear a thud coming from the roof of the cab. I stop, grab my tire thumper off its hook, and ready myself for whatever the hell is going on. Then a motherfucking goose falls off the top of the truck and lands on my hood. It stands up, waddles back and forth, and looks at me. As we make eye contact, the tapping at my door starts again. I say fuck it and throw open the driver's side door, and there's another damn goose waddling away with all the speed it can manage, honking like a 5-year-old who just found the horn on his new bike. The pond I parked next to had a ton of them just dicking around. Needless to say, it was hard to sleep that night because every couple minutes the damn geese would peck at my door or land on the cab and waddle around. Story 3. Then I hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson, Arizona up into Salt Lake City, UT. While this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now, this was in the middle of nowhere, closest town was like 40 miles away, so it is completely pitch black outside once I turn the lights off. Anyway, around 4 a.m. I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide the F awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall, trying to scare whatever is out there, slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Story 4. I posted this somewhere else recently, but it fits better here. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains/Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota, trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat. Like, really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move. Not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the 2 people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Story 5. A petite woman in scrubs that were covered in blood came out of the pickup. Not the middle of nowhere, but a trash route in a pretty rural area. We were at a stop loading trash when a pickup stopped behind us. A petite woman in scrubs that were covered in blood got out and asked directions to Lake Jack Nolan. She said there was a deer that had been hit by a truck and she had been sent to remove the remains. She never said who sent her, but she wasn't moving a deer anywhere at her size. We gave her directions and sent her on her way. We all said we wondered if she was going to dump a body or something. She was already covered in blood in a nice truck and was supposed to be on her way to move roadkill that was far too heavy for her to handle. Then we went back to work. Story 6. My CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning, my CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere, some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate for miles and saw not one set of headlights. This one is kind of funny, but still strange. Story 7. A woman with a terrified expression stared at me. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bon, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks, fuck this, and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing/misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc., and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same Miss Trunchbull hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lobby and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman/car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? I was reading this story for the video at 3 a.m. and even I got terrified. Story 8. The radio DJ saved me. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5 to 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there are multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a news story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Got goosebumps again. Story 9. I noticed a very large black shape on the road. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either northeast BC or northwest Alberta, can't remember the exact location, driving late at night, when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a 4-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever, no shine from its eyes, nothing. And then I noticed there were more of them in the ditch on both sides of the road. 5 or 6, or maybe more, all the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things. More like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off. I don't really believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for 8+ hours through the middle of the night, and I was exhausted. Most likely, it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and spending too long staring straight ahead into the dark. But it was still a very unsettling experience. Story 10. A demon trying to make him crash. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down steep grade and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks, he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot-tall embankment. As he got closer, it jumped down, and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound, it leaped down and then leaped over to the other side of the embankment. At the time, he thought it was a Sasquatch. Now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain. Story 11. The suspicious roadkill. I was driving through Montana headed east, and my company had miscalculated my mileage, so I requested an emergency fuel up. I got a response with the nearest gas station that I could get approved at. It wasn't exactly close, so I turned off the main highway and headed toward my stop. It's pitch black, there's no moon, no city light, and I haven't seen any headlights for about an hour. I'm cruising down the highway, and I see something in the middle of the road at the furthest extent of my headlights, so I slow down, naturally, as I approach it. When I come to pass it, I get one good glance at it and slam on my brakes as I pass right in the middle of the highway. All I could think was, what did I just see? So I back up looking in my mirror until I see its red silhouette in my brake lights. I pull my brakes, put on my jacket, and grab my flashlight and hop out. I walk to the back of my trailer and put my light on it, and there it was. A headless, skinless, mangled corpse. I froze and my jaw dropped. I didn't know what I was looking at. I just stood there, in the middle of the highway, in the cold, stagnant air. The only sound is the hum of my truck 50 feet back, watching the steam rise from this pile of meat. There was no fur, there was no clothing, just a fully intact ribcage with a mess of other miscellaneous bones attached by ligaments. I debated calling the police, as the ribcage looked big enough for someone my size, but I looked at my phone and had zero cell service. The nearest town was about 50 miles out. When I put my phone away, I flashed my light around, and standing at the end of the road were a handful of coyotes staring at me. Then they started coming through the fence and trotting my direction. I figured this is the part where I get back in the truck before I get into a situation, so I did, and continued on my way. I still to this day do not know if it was human or not. Whatever it was, and whatever had happened, I was almost a witness of. I convinced myself that it was more than likely a deer and was hit by another truck like my own at highway speeds that would definitely do significant damage. But in retrospect, I've never seen roadkill missing its flesh before. Guys, avoid stopping at the road in nighttime. Story 12. The Shapeshifter. Many years ago, I was on a shift called Meet and Turn. This is where the truck driver that is domiciled out of the city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other driver that meets him halfway and brings the load where it needs to be delivered. I had been doing runs like these for several months, and I found out that I had to meet on point an hour before the other driver arrived. It was a dark and empty lot around 3 a.m., so since there was still some time to kill, I decided to close my eyes and take a short nap. About 10 minutes into my nap, I was awakened by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but the bark carried on for several minutes, and it grew louder and closer. At this point, it became clear that he's either trying to alert me of something or he's just being a pain in the butt. So I sat up and looked out my window, and what I saw left me motionless. Standing there, inches on the other side of the glass, was a man around 35 years of age. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness struck me, and gently, without making any sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly started pulling away. As I was doing so, he was chasing after me, much like you would expect an angry dog, and still barking as I kept pulling away. Needless to say, I don't take naps on the job anymore. Did you? After reading these stories, it becomes clear that the road holds more than just the expected challenges of long-haul driving. It holds inexplicable and spine-tingling mysteries that linger long after a driver's journey on the road is over. These tales remind us that the darkness of the highway conceals more than just the absence of light. It conceals the unexpected and the uncanny. Keep reading for a few more of the scariest stories told by drivers. Story 13. The Shoulder Walker. My most common run is Vancouver to San Francisco. It's an easy trip most of the time with very little challenge involved. I tend to prefer driving into the night because there's less traffic. Of course, driving around in the middle of nowhere during witching hour means I've seen my share of things. UFOs, Bigfoot, the works, man. But none of that stuff has ever scared me nearly as bad as the people you see walking along the shoulder of the road far from civilization. I noticed my first one on my junior run down south on the number 5. It was a lady in a blue summer dress, just strolling down the side of the highway underneath the full moon, not a care in the world. Now, we were on a stretch that was miles and miles away from anything in either direction, and I was the first vehicle on the road that she'd likely seen since dusk. She didn't even look up to acknowledge me, though. Instead, she just kept on walking with a sort of vacant smile. I chalked it up to some hippie from the Oregon Trail, hopped up on something from a nearby campsite, and kept driving. But she was only the first. It's not every trip you spot them, but sometimes you see a few on a single go. It always struck me as strange because you never seem to see them during the day. Or maybe you do, but they don't stick out as much under the sun. Even so, once you know they're there, you'll start noticing the hell out of them whenever you're driving far from civilization in the dark. The other truckers call them moon wanderers, but I prefer shoulder walkers, since that's always where they are. Almost like trains on a track, they walk that little white line to wherever they're going. They're different shapes and sizes too. Men, women, tall, fat, ugly, pretty, just folks like you'd see anywhere. Sure, they're creepy, but for a long time I didn't pay them any mind beyond noticing them on occasion in the split second that they were visible as I cruised past. But one night a few months ago, I passed by what looked like an old lady. She was in a hospital gown and looked just like someone on death row. Sunken, given up on life sort of eyes, frizzy white hair, and pale skin. She was smiling just like her grandkids had called her name. Her pace was a slow shuffle along the shoulder, and just looking at her, I could imagine the sound of her hospital slippers running just over top the gravelly road. I wanted to keep driving because, well, to be honest, she gave me the willies. But hell, she reminded me of my own sweet grandma. God rest her soul. So I brought my rig to a slow stop and, collecting up the flashlight I keep in my glove box, stepped out of the cab. I could hear her coming before I could see her as I'd driven a few meters ahead of her due to the long stop time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I could visualize her wrinkly feet in those hospital slippers, shuffling ever onward. Quickly, I checked the Maps app on my phone and saw that the closest town to where we were was over 50 miles. No way this old lady was walking that. Putting my phone in my jeans, I held up my flashlight and started walking towards the sound of her footfalls. Hello? Ma'am. I called out, hoping that she would speak up. No such luck, just more scraping. My hairs were on edge now as I waited for her to enter into the dim light of my flashlight. I nearly cried out as the ghostly appearance came into view. Not because anything was different from before, just because she looked so much more sickly up close. Ma'am, are you okay? You're in the middle of nowhere, you know. She didn't say nothing, just kept smiling and moving steadily forward. Now my heart was beating hard. She's just senile. Senile, and she needs my help, I thought out loud. But my feet were frozen in place. They were going back to the truck, or they weren't moving at all. She was getting closer, though, and as she reached within 10 feet or so, her wrinkled hands began to reach slowly up. Her fingers wiggled in my direction like a grandma reaching for her grandchild's face. She opened her mouth, but didn't say anything, just grinned at me with pale gums. My legs gave out, and as I fell onto my side, she reached down for me with surprising speed and dexterity. Before I knew what was going on, she had her bony fingers around my ankles, and I was getting dragged down the road. Desperately, I pulled back, but her grip was superhuman, and the addition of my weight didn't seem to slow her walk in the least. She stared down at me with those beady, sunken eyes, mouth agape, and a smile. I kicked at her with all the fight I had in me and luckily connected with her jaw. To my horror, it was like kicking solid concrete. But luckily, she let go despite having no visible injury. I crawled backwards towards the middle of the road, and she kept walking down the shoulder. Her hands fell back down to her side, and her mouth closed into a tight-lipped smile. But her gaze stayed locked on mine as she slowly shuffled out of my flashlight's beam. I waited as the scraping bit by bit faded from my ears, and after what ended up being a half hour of stunned silence, I worked up the nerve to get up and go back to my rig. No sign of the lady, but when I climbed into my cab and sped down the highway, it didn't take long to catch up with her. Her eyes were still stuck on me. They probably had been the whole time as she walked away. The last I saw of her as I gunned it away was her thin, chapped, smirking lips. According to some other guys I know, I'm the first to try and interact with a shoulder walker, and if God is good, I'll be the last. Since then, I've seen plenty more, strolling down the highway in the pitch dark. I even saw a kid once. But there ain't no way I'm ever stopping again for them. And if you're smart, you won't neither. Since that night, the shoulder walkers are always looking right at me when I drive past, which they never used to do. Almost like since that old lady saw me, they all did. I'd hate to think what would have happened if I'd not managed to get free. But I can rest easy knowing I've put my warning out there in public. Maybe I'll save a few folks with this story. Story 14. The Fog. I was driving for Costco a few years back. It was around this time of year. We usually took extra toy shipments to various locations due to the holiday season. We got a call that one of our locations in rural Kentucky needed to restock their giant Spider-Man dolls. They knew I was a fast driver, so I was giving the last-minute late-night duty. I loaded my truck and headed out on the 265. It was around 3 a.m. when I started to have this eerie feeling. I chalked it up to just being tired and popped a couple of no-dos. About 15 minutes later, the road started to fog up. I mean, more so than any other time before or since. It got to the point where I had to pull off to the side and wait. There weren't any other cars on the road, and I was ahead of time, so I figured I could wait until it cleared up a bit. About 5 minutes of sitting still in silence, my truck goes dead. No lights, no engine, nothing. I try my CB, but cannot get anyone on. I check my cell phone, and there is no signal. As I'm sitting there contemplating my next move, I hear what sounds like a child crying. It slowly morphed into a woman crying. Or at least that's what it sounded like to me. Now I'm a big man, 6 feet 3 inches, 250 pounds, but I refused to exit my cab. I did roll down my window and asked if anybody needed help. At that point, the crying stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a sinister laugh. At that point, I felt like the laughter was directed at me. I rolled up my window, and it seemed like the more scared I became, the louder the laugh went. Then as soon as it started, it stopped. And just like that, my truck started back up and the fog dissipated. I drove out of there like a bat out of hell. I get to the next truck stop and pull in. I run to the bathroom and pour water on my face and ask myself, did that really just happen? Story 15. The maybe alien encounter. I was driving through Kansas on I-70 at night once when I hit one of the craziest thunderstorms I've ever seen. It was so bad the road started flooding a bit, and I had to pull into a service plaza and wait it out when the creepy part happened. As I was sitting in the truck watching the storm, there is a series of lightning strikes followed by a blackout. Suddenly, a massively bright light starts moving behind the clouds, too slowly to be an aircraft, but too fast to be part of the storm system. It moves up over the hills/trees before crossing directly overhead, then disappears a bit behind the service plaza. The transit from tree line to plaza took maybe 5 to 10 minutes tops, and while it was overhead, it cast everything in an eerie blue glow and lit up the parking lot. I seriously thought aliens were invading. Anyway, within 10 minutes of the creepy light disappearing, the rain completely stopped, and the parking lot lights came back on, like someone flipped a switch. I got out of there while looking in my mirrors for spaceships or those alien walkers from War of the Worlds. Story 16. A door to the unknown. His trucker ghost story comes from a hauler in Australia. We'll call him Ben. After a long haul through the beautiful city of Melbourne, Ben pulled off for the night in a quiet stretch of the town. Being outside the city limits, he was surprised at the thick darkness that followed after flipping off his rig's lights for the evening. With no streetlights, cars or trucks nearby, it seemed like the pitch black bled into the night sky. He felt lonely, but was accustomed to the solitude of his profession. After his evening ritual of locking the doors, closing the curtains, and checking his surroundings for any potential concerns, he made his way to bed. He rolled from side to side for several minutes, perplexed by the cold he felt despite the summer season. The chill made it difficult to sleep, and he became lost in thought concerning the events of the next day. Suddenly, the cabin light flooded the space in a pale yellow. Startled, Ben sat upright to discover that the passenger side door of his rig was open ever so slightly. Fear shot through him as his mind raced. There was no way the door was faulty. The truck was new and in pristine condition. Was this an intruder? Grabbing a pole used for tightening belts, Ben prepared to meet the invader but didn't move. Seconds seemed like hours as a delicate silence settled over the truck. Nothing. Mustering his courage, he arose from his bed, walked around the perimeter of the truck, and discovered no sign of anything. No footprints, no nearby homes, no vehicles, just Ben and his truck. After uneasily returning to his bed, he fell into an undisturbed sleep. The next day, Ben woke, stretched, and parted the curtains. Gazing out of his window into the daylight, he froze. The hairs on his neck stood up. Immediately adjacent to his truck was an isolated cemetery. Without bothering to put on shoes or pants, Ben started his truck, stepped on the gas, and sped away from that lonely spot. OMG. My bro, Ben must have panicked. I would, but I'm just a cat. So let's go. Story 17. Am I dead? Not necessarily the middle of nowhere, but this happened a few years back in Wyandotte, Michigan, near Detroit. So I'll start by saying I've dealt with sleep paralysis on a regular basis since I was a kid. It used to freak me TF out when I was younger, but now it's just a part of life. Anywho, I arrive at this shipper late one evening and check in to get loaded the next morning. The young lady at the front desk tells me I can park overnight on site, where there's a truck stop not too far down the road. Me, wanting to spare those sweet 20 minutes it'd take to drive from that truck stop to the shipper the next day, decides to park on site for the night. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the shipper's lot for overnight parking is practically in the middle of a cemetery. This spooked me out, but with I don't really believe in that paranormal shit. So I park, close my shades, and lay down for the night. A few weeks prior, I switched up my bedtime routine to include earplugs, a sleeping mask, and 1 milligram of melatonin. Anyone who's had to sleep at a truck stop will understand. On this particular night, I happened to wake up in the middle of the night, paralyzed. It was dark, I couldn't see anything. I had earplugs in, I couldn't hear anything, and I couldn't move. I remember my first thought being, am I dead? Typically, this wouldn't freak me out. As I've stated before, this was normal to me. However, tonight I just happened to be sleeping just a few yards away from the actual dead. That night, as is typical with most nights I've experienced SP, I felt a presence in the truck with me. I felt something crawl into my bunk with me and lay across my body as if it were trying to pin me down. I felt the cab shaking, though it was likely me trying to shake myself awake as I usually do. After some time I was finally able to jolt myself awake, and I'd awaken in a cold sweat with a chill creeping up my spine. At that point I was honestly afraid to pull back the shades and peek outside. But yeah, that was the creepiest thing I've experienced. A close second was the time a lot lizard knocked on my door in the middle of the night outside of Birmingham, Alabama. Other than that, I didn't see much action. Story 18. My uncle's creepy truck driving story. I originally posted this on Creepy Encounters, but I think it was removed because more people thought it would go better here in Paranormal. This is my uncle's story. I'm sorry if it's poorly written. I've wrote it down while he was telling it to me in real time. My name is Rick Martinez, and I am a retired truck driver. This happened when I was like 30 years old. I am now 62. On the road, I've seen many strange things. I've told this story over and over. A lot of people don't believe me. But it starts off in Stockton, California, where I picked up a load of pipe. My destination was Salt Lake City, Utah. I was supposed to refuel in Barstow, California at a truck stop. But lo and behold, they were out of fuel. So I told my supervisor, hey, I got like half a tank of fuel. He told me to continue and hit the first truck stop I seen. So 100 miles into Nevada, nothing but desert. Seen nothing but a sparsely lit desert with a couple towns. When I noticed my gauge set was reading empty, and I'm thinking that's not right. So I took the first exit I saw and pulled over. Told my supervisor, who was right behind me an hour away, that I was afraid to continue on and run the tanks dry. So he told me to sit still, and he would be by in an hour, and we could siphon some of the fuel from his tanks into mine. So I sat there and I noticed that it was a small town with sparse lighting. As I sat there, I couldn't run the engine, so I couldn't listen to the radio, so I sat there in silence. I don't do drugs, and I didn't make this up, so listen carefully. As I'm sitting there, I notice a lot of undone construction, a trailer parked to my right, completely dark, and a church off to my left about a block away with its lights on. It's about 2 a.m., and I see this jackrabbit hopping around my truck. It hops around and just stares at me and keeps hopping around. So I'm getting hungry, and I notice what looks to be a convenience store another block away from the church. So I get off the truck and decide to walk to the store. While I'm walking, I keep hearing this dog howling like it's in pain. As I'm passing the church, the two doors are wide open, and I hear clapping like they're having services. As I pass the church, I look inside, and there's no one except for this skinny white old man reading from the Bible and talking about hell. I don't linger too long and pass the church. Then I heard clapping again. About then, the dog starts howling again. I notice there's a bunch of empty houses on this street that goes uphill. I still am making my way towards what I think is a little mini mart. All the time the dog keeps howling. All the lights are on. As I go inside, this little old lady with glasses is reading a book. There's hardly anything in this store. Maybe a few cans of food, couple bags of chips, only water in the refrigerators. The whole time the lady didn't even pick her head up from the book. So I grab a water, grab chips, I'm hungry as hell, and there's nothing to eat. So I asked the old lady, is this all you have, and where is everybody at? She told me everybody moved out and new construction was supposed to begin like 6 months ago. And she didn't say anything after that, so I paid her and walked out and started walking back towards the truck. The whole time the dog is still howling. So as I got closer towards the church, I looked up the street towards where I heard the howling from. I decided to go see for myself why the dog was howling. House on both sides of the street are boarded up and dark. I saw a house with the lights on, with about a 5-foot fence. When I looked over the fence, I was in shock. What I saw was a man in his underwear with a chain attached to his neck on all fours, howling. The hairs on my arms and neck stood up as I saw this other man burst through the back door and kick the man on all fours and was yelling at him to shut up. He ran into a dog house. I was in shock and turned and ran back down the hill to my truck. As I passed the church, both doors still wide open, but there was no lights on anymore, and still I can hear the clapping. Finally made it to my truck, called my supervisor, and told him what I saw. Told him hurry and get here so I can leave. My supervisor asked what exit W are you talking about, and I told him, and he said, oh, I passed that. He had to turn around and come back to get me. So I'm sitting there and the rabbit is still hopping around my truck. It stopped and looked up at me as I'm sitting in my truck. I'm not saying the rabbit said it, but this is what I heard. Leave. I rolled up the window and waited for my supervisor, who showed up 5 minutes after. I told my supervisor what happened, and he just laughed at me and told me I'm going to have to drug test you. I did not sleep on that whole trip to Utah until I got to Salt Lake City. Believe it or not, I swear this is what happened. An advice for you. Always ask your older relatives for stories. They always will have an interesting one. Story 19. Ghost. You know, my grandpa told me one a while back. Really eerie and totally unexpected. He looks like your typical trucker, beer gut, and a different snapback every time I see him. Definitely doesn't seem the sort to believe in ghosts. But on this past New Year's, we were all drinking, and the conversation shifted to the paranormal. I expected my sister to chime in because she's claimed to experience a myriad of shit paranormally speaking. But no, it was Grandpa that spoke up. He mentioned that 20 years ago he was doing a route down in Florida, kind of in a swampy area, I guess. He said it was getting really late, probably 1 a.m., when he saw a woman on the side of the road. Being a good Samaritan, he pulled over and tries to speak to her. First, he tries yelling at her from his truck, asking if she was all right. From what he could tell, she was barefoot and standing in a ditch. She was wearing a dirty white nightgown and had long brown matted hair. Yelling wasn't working, so he stepped out and walked over to her. He couldn't get a good look at her face because she was kind of leaning forward and her hair was hanging down. So he kept asking her if she was okay, if she needed a ride anywhere. When he was about 5 feet away from her, about to step into the ditch, his truck horn blared. He turned around and didn't see anyone in his truck and turned back to say the girl was gone. He was scared shitless, so he got in his truck and drove off to the next town. I think he reported it to the police in case she was a missing person, but I don't think anything really came of it. That's probably one of the few paranormal stories I actually believe, because my grandpa is a serious and quiet guy. I doubt he'd lie about something like that. Story 20. Don't walk on the tracks. My dad was a trucker for many years. One time he told me he'd stopped at a mandatory way station somewhere at night that was refurbished from an old train station. My dad parked the truck and got out, noticing that someone was walking along the train tracks with a light. It was really late, so my dad called out and asked if he was okay. The man kept walking. My dad said he had a lantern in his hand. My dad called out again, and the man never turned around. He went into the office and told them that some drunk asshole is walking the train tracks, and the guy behind the desk nonchalantly says, "Yeah, was it this guy?" and points to an old-ass picture on the wall. It was a picture of all the rail yard guys from over 70 years before. Sure enough, my dad had seen one of the guys in the photo. Apparently, a lot of people have seen whatever that was and come in asking questions. Story 21. Woman in the headlights. My dad is a retired trucker, and he's told me this story many times. He'd parked up in a very rural area for the night, surrounded by nothing but fields around and the occasional passing truck. He put his head down and had a little nap, woke up sometime later needing to pee. He switched his headlights on and prepared to hop out and do his business when he saw a lady standing just a little way in front. He watched her, wondering where she'd come from when another truck drove past. He looked again and she's gone. He got so spooked he drove to a more populated area and spent the night parked there instead. Story 22. Mysterious rubber ball. Just a couple of months ago, I worked a pretty late shift one night. Left the office around 2 a.m. and have a 30-minute drive home. I live pretty far out in the woodland areas of the country. Forest directly on both sides of the road. I was casually driving along through the fog, and out of nowhere a kid's rubber ball, the basketball-sized ones with cartoons on them, comes bouncing out in the middle of the road from the trees. I slammed on my brakes and swerved to miss because I thought for sure a kid was bound to be chasing behind it. Never seen a soul step out. As I drive on by and started thinking, what would a kid be doing out playing this late? Then I remembered there were no houses around where this happened at. Someone had to have thrown it in the road. The height it came onto the road at, and the way it bounced the wind simply didn't blow it in front of me. It was pretty creepy. Story 23. The Corpse Bride. Driving home from a late shift, I come to a part of the road that is a huge hill, low point, then huge hill again with nothing but forest all around. As I crest the hill, I see an orange van on its side at the very bottom of the hill and a woman standing in a wedding dress next to it. I slow down and see that she is covered in blood. Holy SHD. This is way before cell phones, so I slowly pass, taking in her calm expression, her blood-stained wedding dress, the undercarriage of that orange van, and pull over to the right slightly past the wreckage. Get out of my car, look back, and nothing. There was nothing there but empty, dark road. I freak out, speed home hoping a cop would pull me over. I still don't know what I saw. Story 24. Knock knock, who's there? My brother was a truck driver in the 90s/early 2000s. He just told me this story a few months ago. He was driving through Pennsylvania on his way back to NJ. He pulled over to the side of the road behind two other trailers. In the early morning, he heard someone bang on his right door. He quickly jumps from the sleeping compartment and grabs his bat. As he looks out the window, there's no one there, but now there's a bang on the left side. Freaked out, he looks out that window, and there's nothing but silence now. He's trying to figure out WTF is going on, seconds later banging on both doors simultaneously. He said the banging was so loud and heavy that the truck was shaking. Both curtains open. He can see there's no one out there. He quickly jumps in the driver's seat and starts the truck. He sees the other two trucks ahead of him do the same. He said he felt as if they all had experienced the same thing. Story 25. Truck Stop Horror. This is a real-life 100% story that happened to me. In 2003, I had met a guy that said he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know that the safe world I had grown up with was about to get shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside of my state. Never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that have been happening over the countryside. So my, now ex, decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times, and I got to see most of the U.S. But trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 isn't easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. People now have advancement in technology and the ability to binge watch your favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on your phone to keep yourself occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had was either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media, long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even a thought. Just like we do now, we create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who are basically strangers. And trust me, truckers can be creepy AF. And keeping a bit of anonymity, the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, changed for his safety. And me since I was a baby, barely 20 years old. And I'm from the Alaska, so mine ended up being Northern Exposure, again changed for safety reasons. During the time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people, and you see a ton of crazy shit. And I do mean a ton of crazy shit. People often hear about stories of things that happen on the road. Most of them are more gross than scary. You know, like drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it be a dog, cat, or even goat. But this time was one of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life. And when it comes to strange and unusual events, my life is full of them. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like flat out scared to talk to someone? A voice that makes you think that the person on the other line is not all there? That was this guy. Something about him just made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle, and we heard the distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out and touch someone. So we could just hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I heard it. That voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I could now describe it would be like how Heath Ledger talks as Joker in the Batman movie. There was something just off about it, and it gave me the chills. He simply said, "Hey there, Purple Pete, the color of our truck. Where you headed?" My ex hollered back, "We were heading to Arkansas." The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along with us and introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. The guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never physically seen his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week, when we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back, because by that time we would have ran out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure. Even though I totally didn't want to meet this guy, my ex had become friends with him, so we gave him an ETA on when we would be back in the area and what truck stop we would be at, and told him we would meet up for a meal with him. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed, and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radios would no longer reach. We had finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on and waited. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime, lots of bad stuff happens, so we waited in the truck. Finally, we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited and eventually killed enough time where we could take another load, so we headed out, never actually meeting up with him in Nevada. But a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, truck stop hookers, getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. But chalked it up to drama on the radio. After all, we had quite literally nothing better to do than to make up truck driver stories. We had kept hearing about it and even brought it up to Maniac, and he just laughed and said it must be one real sick fuck doing it. It must just be a story, because if it was true they would have caught him already. I bet he has even left fingerprints or semen at the crime scene. With as bloody and messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught. Seemed like a weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so that was totally in character for him. Maniac went his way, and we went ours, and after a while I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later, we were in Mississippi, and we hear a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day, and most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop our trailer and head out bobtail. So we chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and that he would be heading out the next morning. And so, cutting our much-needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier, and I wasn't talking to him, and he absolutely hated the silent treatment. Our load was to deliver in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back. Win/win. We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee and finally, after about 6 months of chatting, meet each other. We weren't afraid to meet up with him, but I was still very on edge. Now I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house and was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6 feet 3 inches and about 280 pounds. So in theory we could take him if need be. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in the trucks, and if you were caught by DOT, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer and meet us at a Flying J petrol station. That was down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. So we get ready to fuel up, we showered, and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food, and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate, and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so. There wasn't much for noise in this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted to shit ton of flashing lights. It's not uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in shit they are not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops and a truck stop go hand in hand. But this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying JS, so it could probably fit about 80 truck and trailers if you went all the way back to the dirt. And then you could Tetris a dozen or so trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy like. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lot lizard even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe to walk in alone. I was walking with my ex, and we weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious I was with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird he was in a truck space with no trailer. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers because that was again another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was dark truck, maybe a dark black or blue with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type of truck it was, just that it was kind of menacing in the dark. Old school trucker code was if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his reading red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat. He had the red reading light on so I could see his face. It was a little distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile and then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could see his truck from ours. I remember looking back and seeing the red light still illuminating the porthole window in the passenger door, and a small slit down the curtain showed a dark spot. He was still watching us. Even with as warm as it was, chills shot up my spine, and I got a very uneasy feeling. My gut wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB for our night entertainment and to see if we could radio Maniac to see what the deal was. The chatter was about all the cops and the ambulance, fire truck, and DOT. All the commotion was basically across from us, but 2 rows up. People were saying there was a dead lot lizard, and that it was bad. Like gnarly. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told that he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being the nosy people we are, my ex and I jump out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase, some things cannot be unseen. This was one of them. The lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer and the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, cuffed, his head hung limp with his forehead on the back of the seat. He was crying big heavy sobs, and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door, wailing that he had nothing to do it, and praying to God to be forgiven for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left, and just decided to pull out of his space. While she was fucking attached, she got ripped apart, right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that, and it was like something you would probably see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me, pale, and looked as if he was going to get sick. I don't do well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was almost running back, 0 fucks given that I should have waited for my ex, because he had the keys. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. So I ran to the truck stop full speed. I was going to get sick, and I would rather not have people see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, and it was gone. My ex made it into the truck stop looking for me, and he said he would walk me back to the truck so I could get some sleep. Yeah, right, like I could sleep after seeing that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out of the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a tap on the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone in the truck stop, giving us the rundown about safety and numbers and to not go anywhere alone. I wasn't planning on leaving the truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at me in the bobtail truck and the description of the truck. The officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing that image. Flashes kept going through my head. The vivid image of her face. She had a red rag in her mouth and the 100 miles per hour tape around her wrists tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because there were bruises formed on her stomach and her face. Mascara was running down her cheeks. And the smell, like rotted meat and blood, makes my stomach queasy just thinking about it. It didn't seem to faze my ex. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, or I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real and it was just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad for the time being having it out of my head. Fast forward, and it was February, about 3 months after that incident, and we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see the Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries to see the mausoleums and go into the voodoo shops and such. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps. We were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole-in-the-wall mom and pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go. "Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out this way?" The voice on the CB was loud, so he was really, really close. There was only 2 other trucks in the lot. An old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted. "Maniac, hey man, where the hell have you been? Why did you stand us up there, good buddy?" My ex radioed back. "Oh man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy and I'd rather not get fucking caught," he said with a chuckle. "Caught? What do you mean caught?" My ex questioned. "Don't worry about it. You just keep an eye on your girl. I'd really hate for something bad happen to her." Like all of those other girls, he trailed off. We watched the CB key up again, burying the needle on the radio. The signal high, it had to be in the same fucking truck stop to ping so high. Silence. He was keyed up, but just kind of breathing in the mic. "You know, with all the bad things I've been doing in the truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. Heh, those nasty sluts. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with the drugs and the sex like they do." It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. Silence. His voice was even louder this time. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended in the truck stop. Only God and the devil himself can judge me for my sins. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones that plague humanity. We looked at each other. This was the only time I had ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time I was scared, like truly scared. A dust cloud came rolling up into the truck stop, and this dark black menacing Peterbuilt with a cattle guard and brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed up just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. He smiled that fucking disgusting smile at us as he put the mic to his lips. "Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf and Northern Exposure." His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back on the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he had actually been ridding the world of its sins. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around, I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6-inch blade on me at all times just in case I ever ran into Maniac. Thanks for riding along with us on this dark journey down the haunted highways. If these tales from the road gave you chills, remember, the night is always watching, and the shadows never truly sleep. Keep your headlights on and stay alert out there, because you never know what might be lurking just beyond the edge of the road. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want more stories that crawl under your skin and stay with you long after the engine stops. From all of us at NoctiPawz, drive safe and watch the night. Until next time, stay in the shadows and keep your story alive.